Ancient Egyptian funerary texts are some of the most compelling aspects of Egyptology. Their evolution reveals the profound ways Egyptian religious beliefs, burial practices, and conceptions of the afterlife changed over millennia. These texts, ranging from the pyramid texts of the Old Kingdom to the books of breathing of the Greco-Roman period, reflect the Egyptians' deepest desire, ensuring safe passage to the afterlife and securing immortality. In this episode, we will journey through the development of these texts, uncovering how they evolved from exclusive royal privilege to accessible guidance for the broader population. The pyramid texts are the oldest known religious texts in the world, dating to the 5th and 6th dynasties, circa 2400 to 2100 BCE. These texts were inscribed on the walls of royal pyramids and served exclusively to guide the pharaohs through their journey in the afterlife. Pharaohs, considered divine figures, required divine assistance to ensure their successful transformation into Osiris-like beings after death and their ultimate reunion with the gods in the heavens. The pyramid texts comprise nearly 800 spells, designed to assist the king in his celestial journey, often with the aid of ladders and ramps, symbolizing both a physical and spiritual ascent. The texts frequently identify the king with the sun god Ra, ensuring that his immortality is secure. The first pyramid texts were discovered in the pyramid of King Unas at Saqqara. These inscriptions marked a shift from spoken funerary rituals to inscribed formulas, cementing the written word as a powerful tool in religious practice. By inscribing these texts within their burial chambers, the pharaohs sought to align themselves with the gods Ra and Osiris, solidifying their divine status even in death. By the Middle Kingdom, circa 2100 to 1700 BCE, funerary beliefs began to change. No longer were these protective spells and the promises of immortality reserved solely for pharaohs. The coffin texts appeared, written on the coffins of non-royal individuals, allowing a much wider portion of Egyptian society to access these essential guides to the afterlife. The coffin texts retained many elements from the pyramid texts but expanded their scope. New spells were added, depicting a much more complex afterlife filled with realms and dangers that required specific knowledge to navigate. One of the most significant additions to these texts was the Book of Two Ways, a detailed map of the underworld that showed two potential routes the deceased soul could take to reach the afterlife. The coffin texts also introduced the concept of moral judgment, foreshadowing the famous weighing of the heart ceremony that would later appear in the Book of the Dead. In this rite, the heart of the deceased was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, symbolizing truth and justice. This judgment determined whether the deceased was worthy of entering the eternal paradise or would face destruction. For the first time, these texts featured illustrations, which often depicted the deceased's journey through the underworld, filled with dangerous creatures and obstacles that they would need to overcome. The coffin texts reflected an important shift in Egyptian funerary practices. Death was no longer a royal concern, but something all individuals could prepare for with the right knowledge and guidance. By the New Kingdom, circa 1550 to 1070 BCE, the Book of the Dead, also known as the Book of Going Forth by Day, had become the dominant funerary text. Unlike the pyramid and coffin texts, which were inscribed on tomb walls and coffins, the Book of the Dead was written on papyrus scrolls, often placed in the tomb alongside the deceased. This text was widely available to anyone who could afford it, reflecting a growing belief that all individuals, not just the elite, could access the afterlife with the right spells and knowledge. The Book of the Dead provided detailed instructions on navigating the underworld. It contained over 200 spells, including protection from hostile deities, guidance on traversing the dangerous duat, and incantations to help the deceased soul, Ba, reunite with its body, Ka, a vital component of achieving eternal life. What made the Book of the Dead particularly remarkable was its personal nature. Each scroll was individualized, with the name of the deceased inscribed and specific spells selected based on the person's status, wealth, and spiritual needs. This personalized guidance ensured that the deceased would have everything they needed to succeed in their journey to the afterlife. While the Book of the Dead became widely accessible, certain funerary texts remained exclusive to royalty. Two of these texts, the Amduat and the Book of Gates, focused on guiding the pharaoh through the complex realms of the underworld. These texts provided detailed maps of the underworld and focused particularly on Ra's journey through the 12 hours of the night. The Amduat, meaning that which is in the underworld, describes Ra's journey through the 12 hours of the night, representing the sun's death and rebirth. The pharaoh, depicted as accompanying Ra, plays an essential role in this cycle of cosmic regeneration. The Book of Gates emphasizes the need for the deceased to know the names of the gates, their guardians, and the functions of the various deities they would encounter. Without this knowledge, the deceased would be unable to pass through the gates and reach eternal life. These texts reinforce the divine role of the pharaoh as a protector of Ma'at and a vital part of the cosmic order. By the Greco-Roman period, circa 332 BCE, 395 CE, the complex spells of the Book of the Dead were replaced by shorter and more concise texts known as the Books of Breathing. These simplified texts were designed to make burial rites easier and more accessible for a broader portion of society. The primary focus of the Books of Breathing was to ensure that the deceased could continue to breathe in the afterlife, symbolizing the preservation of life force. Although simpler, these texts retained key elements of earlier funerary practices, including the judgment of the deceased and their union with Osiris in the afterlife. The condensed nature of these texts reflects a shift towards more practical and accessible burial practices, as Egyptian society adapted to new cultural influences during the Greco-Roman period. The Books of Breathing ensured that essential concepts, such as moral judgment, protection from evil forces, and the soul's journey through the afterlife, were still maintained. However, they focused more on the preservation of the life force and the simplified continuation of rituals, distilling complex ideas from earlier texts into forms that were easier to use and understand. Despite their brevity, the Books of Breathing, much like their predecessors, retained the underlying principle of resurrection and eternal life in the afterlife. They also demonstrate how Egyptian religious beliefs endured, even as Egyptian society became increasingly influenced by external cultures. One of the most important aspects of Egyptian funerary texts, regardless of their content, was their material presence within the tomb. From the inscriptions on the walls of the pyramids to the papyrus scrolls of the Book of the Dead, the physical act of writing these texts was believed to imbue them with magical power. For the Egyptians, writing itself was a divine act that allowed the deceased to interact with the spiritual realm. The Egyptians believed that by inscribing these texts within tombs, on walls, coffins, or mummy wrappings, they were ensuring the activation of the spells within. The placement of these texts in the tomb was as important as the words themselves, as it guaranteed that the deceased would be protected and guided during their journey through the afterlife. Tomb paintings and decorations were often created to visually complement the funerary texts, illustrating key moments in the deceased's journey through the underworld. Scenes such as the weighing of the heart ceremony or interactions between the deceased and the gods were frequently depicted, emphasizing the spiritual significance of these moments and reinforcing the protective power of the texts. The materiality of these texts also reflects a deeper religious belief in the power of words and images. By physically embedding the texts within the tomb, the Egyptians ensured that the deceased was surrounded by a protective, spiritual force, ensuring their success in the afterlife and their eventual resurrection. The evolution of ancient Egyptian funerary texts, from the exclusive pyramid texts to the simplified Books of Breathing, reveals a society deeply invested in the journey to the afterlife. These texts not only served as guides but also reflected the religious and social changes within Egyptian society. What began as a privilege of the pharaohs eventually became accessible to commoners, showing the democratization of religious beliefs and the universal desire for eternal life. As we continue to explore the mysteries of ancient Egypt, we will delve deeper into the rituals and symbols that accompanied these texts. Join us in our next episode as we examine how funerary practices evolved and how the ancient Egyptians sought to secure their place in the afterlife. If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to continue your journey with us through the wonders of ancient Egyptian history.